Hey everyone. So in this video I'm going to go over the PowerPoint on Chapter 11, Writing About Theme. So we're going to take a look at what theme is, defining it, and why it's important. We're going to look at how to know that you are correctly identifying a theme versus simply the subject of the story. And then we're going to look at some questions that you can ask yourself that will help lead to a better understanding of theme. And some of these will sound very familiar to you. But first, what is theme? So it can be defined in many ways. It can, you can say that the theme is the central idea or the thesis of the story, the central thought of the story. It can also be described as the underlying meaning of the story, and it might be an underlying meaning that is directly stated at some point in the story or simply implied as you read the story. Theme is also the general insights that are revealed by the story, the central truth, the dominating idea. It is an abstract concept that is made concrete through the characters, the structure, the imagery, the symbolism, the point of view, and the setting and atmosphere. So everything that we have looked at prior to this so far, those are all elements of a story that when examined closely will help us figure out the theme of the story. But first we need to make sure that we understand the difference between the subject of the story and the theme of the story. The subject of the story is simply the topic, the material of the story. So for instance, you might read a story and the subject of it is war, or the subject is love. The subject is marriage. The subject is death. The subject is prejudice and racism. The subject is power. But that's just the subject. The subject doesn't reveal anything to us. It doesn't make us think about something on a deeper level. It does not make a statement about life or the human condition. So the theme then is a direct or implied statement that the story makes about that subject. So if the subject of the story is marriage, what is the story saying about marriage? If the subject is death, what is the story saying about death? Right? If it's about human relationships, what is it saying about human relationships? So I give you an example here. This is actually a story we're going to read. So the subject of Alice Walker's short story, Everyday Use, the subject matter is mother-daughter relationships. Right? What does the story say about that kind of relationship? The theme might give us insight about heritage and tradition. Maybe it gives us insight, even though it's about mothers and daughters, maybe it gives us insight into some sort of prejudice or bigotry. So there's a difference between, the subject and the theme. And then on slide 5, I give you a little more of the specific examples. So in the first column, I have a statement that reveals the theme of Romeo and Juliet. And that statement says, ultimately, the central marriage in Romeo and Juliet ends in death, showing that this kind of passionate, irrational union cannot exist in a world fueled by hate and revenge. So in that statement, the beginning of it touches on the subject of the play. Ultimately, the central marriage in Romeo and Juliet ends in death. That's something that everybody gets right away when they read it, right? There's nothing new that we're revealing in that part of the statement. It's just the subject matter. No one ever questions what the subject is of a story. If you read it, you understand what the subject matter is. That's evident. What we don't always understand is the next part, the statement of theme. What does Shakespeare say about marriage in Romeo and Juliet? This kind of passionate, irrational union cannot exist in a world fueled by hate and revenge. So we know what the subject matter is. That's obvious. When we look closely at the play, what is Shakespeare saying about that subject? That's the theme. And I have another version here, The Wizard of Oz. So in The Wizard of Oz, each of the four main characters yearn for something. A brain, a heart, courage, home, and look to others, i.e. the wizard, to provide for them when all along they had it within themselves, revealing their own powers of self-sufficiency. So this subject, the statement of subject, is almost the whole statement there until the very end. But we don't question, when we watch The Wizard of Oz, it's really clear that the four main characters are looking for something. We know what each one is looking for. We know they go to the wizard to try to find it. And we know that ultimately he tells them that they had it in them all along. But what does that mean? What is the author saying about that subject matter? It reveals their own powers of self-sufficiency. That's the message we're supposed to take from that movie or book, right? Same thing with the Shakespeare example. We understand Romeo and Juliet have this very quick, passionate love affair that neither family approves of, and there's a lot of fighting and death and revenge. What is Shakespeare saying, though? What is the message he's trying to show us? That's the theme. So you can't just say, for example, the first short story that you're going to read, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. You're going to learn right away as soon as you start reading it that the main character, Mrs. Mallard, her husband has just died. She has just found out that her husband died. You can't just say that The Story of an Hour is about a woman who finds out that her husband just died. That's obvious. That's not the theme, though. What is Chopin trying to tell us about that subject? That's what you have to figure out. Okay? How can we figure it out? Well, first, look at your characters. Who is the main character? Is the main character or any other character, are they described through dialogue in any way? Not meaning like described by other characters, I mean how the character, him or herself, speaks. Do they speak with any kind of dialect or slang, for instance? What does that tell us about that character? Has the author described their physical appearance, their thoughts, their feelings, how they interact, right? Are they static characters, flat characters who don't change throughout the story? They're just the same as they were when we started the story? Or are they dynamic and round characters? Do they go through some sort of transformation of some sort? What type of characters are they? What qualities stand out? Are they stereotypes? Are they archetypes? Are the characters believable? Are they reliable? Think about the structure. What is the most important event in the story? How does the story unfold? Is it linear and chronological, or does it move around? Are there flash forwards, flashbacks? Is it all disjointed and crazy? Is the plot believable? Think about structure. Think about the imagery and symbolism, right? Is the author's language full of figurative language? What images are used? Do those images turn into motifs Does anything turn into a symbol, right? Um, look at the imagery and symbolism. That will tell you a lot about the theme. Look at the point of view. Who is the narrator of the story? Does the author speak through the main character? Is it somewhat confessional? Is the story written in the first person with the I personal pronoun? Is it in a detached third person? He or she, or objective? Is it that all-knowing third person omniscient narrator? Or is it limited omniscient? Think about all the different points of view there can be and what that tells us, how it might relate to what we're supposed to understand about the story, the message that the author's trying to give us. Look at the setting and atmosphere. How is the setting created? Consider geography, weather, time of day, social conditions. What role does the setting play? Is it a super important factor to the plot? Would we, if the story is taking place in the midst of a natural disaster, then the setting is of utmost importance. We couldn't have the story without the natural disaster, probably. When was the story written? Does it take place in the present, the past, or the future? And how does the time period affect the language? How does it affect the atmosphere or social circumstances of the story? Everything about setting and atmosphere. What is important about those elements? Might it shed light on the theme? And then think about the bigger picture. What real-life issues are reflected in the story? What does the author say about those issues? What point is the author trying to make by writing the story? What does it tell us? What does the story tell us about how people behave? What does the story tell us about how society affects us as individuals? How does the story show us, what does it show us about the relationship between people and nature? What does it show us about right and wrong, or the nature of good and evil, right? So look at each of those elements that we've already talked about: character, structure, imagery and symbolism, point of view, setting and atmosphere, and then take a step back and think about the bigger picture. If you can pay attention to those things and ask yourself questions about all of those elements, pay attention to them, consider them, you will be able to start unraveling what the theme is. And obviously, some stories are not as easy as others, for various reasons. So, we're going to read a couple stories. Well, we're going to read 6. Out of those 6 stories, I think you will be able to at least start circling around the theme, getting in the neighborhood of the theme for most of them. There might even be a few where you see the theme right away after you read it, like you get it right away. But what you might not realize is that there's actually a second theme that you missed. Because there can be more than one. And then there's going to be at least 1 or 2 that stump you. But we will discuss them after you've read them. And we'll get to the theme. But that is our overall goal. Our, initial goals are to read the story and simply understand what's happening. The next step is reading the story and picking up on those elements, those literary elements like structure, imagery, symbolism, point of view, setting, atmosphere, and characters. And then the final step is trying to put it all together to figure out the theme. So that's what our goal is. Alright. I know this is not easy to go through all of these chapters and learn about all of these elements without applying them. Right now we've just learned the basic concepts. So as you read each of the 6 stories as they're assigned over the next 3-4 weeks. Don't forget about these PowerPoints here in this week that we've gone over. I'm not saying that you'll need to come back and go through every one of them again, but they are all pretty short. So you might want to just go through each one real quick and remind yourself what each element is all about. So that way you're remembering what to look for, what to pay attention to as you read each story. So, but if you have any questions right now about theme, what we've gone over here in Chapter 11, let me know. Reach out to me. But just keep in mind that all of this will start to come together a little more once we start reading the stories. Okay? Alright, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you guys are free to move on.